Did you know that one of the most terrifying giant spiders in movie history was actually a completely real spider, just made to look enormous through camera tricks? No computer, no animation. Just a real, living tarantula crawling across carefully built miniature sets while the crew held their breath. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about tarantula. Number 20. The spider was completely real here is something that will make your skin tingle. When audiences first saw Tarantula in 1955, many of them assumed the giant spider crawling across the desert was some kind of puppet or a painted drawing on glass. People whispered about it in movie theaters. They leaned over to their friends and asked, how did they do that? The answer was both brilliant and surprisingly simple. The filmmakers used a completely real tarantula, a living, breathing, eight-legged creature. They did not build a mechanical monster. They did not draw anything by hand, frame by frame. They simply placed a real tarantula onto a miniature landscape and filmed it crawling around. The miniature sets were built with tiny trees, tiny roads, and tiny buildings, all carefully crafted so that when the camera filmed the spider moving across them, everything looked enormous. The spider looked like it was the size of a house. But it was just a tarantula doing what tarantulas do naturally. Walking, exploring, being itself. The magic came entirely from the camera angle and the scale of the tiny world around it. Director Jack Arnold and his team spent hours adjusting the lighting and the little props to make sure every shot looked believable. Sometimes the spider would stop walking and just sit there. The crew would wait. Patiently, quietly, because you cannot tell a real spider what to do. It moves when it wants to move. It stops when it wants to stop. And somehow, that unpredictability made it even more frightening on screen. What looked like a controlled monster movie moment was actually a crew full of people hoping a tarantula would decide to take a few more steps. It looked easy on screen. Behind the camera, it was completely unpredictable. Number 19. Jack Arnold, the king of creature features. Before we go deeper into the spider's story, let's talk about the man who made it all happen. Jack Arnold was a director who loved science fiction more than almost anyone else in Hollywood at the time. He had already made It Came from Outer Space in 1953 and The Creature from the Black Lagoon in 1954. Both of those films became huge hits. Audiences loved them, studios loved them, and Universal Pictures trusted Jack Arnold to keep delivering exciting monster stories that felt real and emotional, not just silly. When Tarantula came along, Arnold jumped at the chance. He saw the story not just as a monster movie, but as a warning. A story about science going too far. A story about ambition becoming dangerous. He approached it seriously. He wanted audiences to feel genuine fear, not just laugh at a fake-looking creature on screen. Arnold was known for being thoughtful about camera placement. He believed that what you did not fully see was sometimes scarier than what you did see. So he would often shoot the spider from angles that only gave you a glimpse, a leg around a corner, a shadow on a wall, a reflection in a window. He built tension slowly, like someone turning up the heat on a stove, one tiny degree at a time. The audience would feel uncomfortable before they even knew why. That was his gift. Arnold also had a talent for working with limited budgets. He could not spend enormous amounts of money on every scene. So he had to be clever. Creative, he made every dollar look like 10 on screen. And with Tarantula, he proved once again that imagination was a more powerful tool than money. He was not just making a movie. He was crafting an experience. What looked effortless on screen took enormous skill and careful planning behind the camera. Number 18. The science behind the story was surprisingly real. Most monster movies in the 1950s were pure fantasy. Flying saucers, aliens, creatures from other dimensions. But Tarantula was different in a fascinating way. The science behind it, though stretched far beyond reality, was actually rooted in real research happening at the time. The story follows a scientist who develops a special nutrient formula that makes animals grow to enormous sizes very quickly. He is trying to solve world hunger, a noble goal. And here's the interesting part. In the early 1950s, scientists really were experimenting with growth hormones and nutrient compounds in animals. There were genuine conversations in the scientific community about whether it might one day be possible to grow larger livestock to feed more people. The film grabbed that real idea and pushed it to the extreme. What if the formula worked too well? What if it could not be controlled? What if it got out into the wild? Screenwriter Robert Fresco and producer William Allen took these real-world scientific anxieties and turned them into a thrilling story. They were not trying to mock scientists. They were asking a genuine question. What are the limits of what humans should do, even when the intentions are good? This gave the film a depth that many of its competitors did not have. It was not just scary monster destroys things, it was what happens when a good idea becomes a dangerous one. Audiences felt that difference, even if they could not always explain it. The fear in Tarantula came from a place that felt close to home, not outer space, not another dimension. Right here, in a laboratory, in a desert, in the world we already live in. That made it linger in the mind long after the theater lights came back on. What felt like science fiction had roots in something frighteningly close to science fact. Number 17. The desert was both a location and a character. Many films use their location simply as a backdrop, a pretty place for actors to stand in front of. But Tarantula used the Arizona desert as something far more important. It used the desert as a character. The wide, empty landscape became part of the fear. When you are in a city and something goes wrong, you can run into a building. You can hide in a crowd. You can call for help from a neighbor. But in the desert, there is nowhere to go. There is nothing around you for miles. That emptiness is terrifying in a very quiet, slow way. Director Jack Arnold understood this. He chose to film on location in and around the desert areas near Hollywood, using the real landscape to create a feeling of total isolation. The flat, open land meant that when the giant spider appeared on the horizon, there was nothing to block your view of it. You saw the whole horrible thing at once. No buildings to hide behind, no forest to get lost in, just open space and a creature the size of a skyscraper walking toward you. The heat of the desert also added something to the performances. The actors were genuinely hot, genuinely uncomfortable, genuinely squinting into a blazing sun. That real discomfort showed on their faces and made their fear look more authentic. The desert also had a kind of ancient, timeless quality that worked perfectly with the film's theme of science disturbing the natural order. This was not a modern city being attacked. This was the earth itself being violated. The oldest landscape humans know, invaded by something that should not exist. The desert did not just surround the story. It deepened it. It was not just a backdrop. It was breathing. Number 16, Clint Eastwood had one of his very first roles here. Here is a fact that makes movie lovers do a double take. Before Clint Eastwood became one of the most famous actors and directors in Hollywood history, before the spaghetti westerns, before Dirty Harry, before his Academy Awards, he had a tiny role in Tarantula. He played a jet pilot. He had only a few seconds of screen time. He wore a flight helmet that covered most of his face. He had no dialogue that made any real impact on the story. He was just one of several pilots sent to stop the giant spider near the end of the film. And yet, there he is, a young Clint Eastwood, barely recognizable, in one of the most beloved creature features of the 1950s. Eastwood himself has talked about this period of his career as a time of learning and waiting. He was taking small roles wherever he could find them. He was paying his dues. He was studying how movies were made by being inside them, even in the smallest possible way. Tarantula was just one of several low-budget films he appeared in during those early years before he found the role that would change everything. What is wonderful about this fact is what it tells us about patience and persistence. The man who would one day direct Unforgiven and Million Dollar Baby was once standing in a desert in a helmet, hoping someone would notice him. Nobody did. Not that day. But he kept going. He kept showing up. And the rest, as they say, is history. A tiny role, a covered face, and one of the greatest careers in cinema quietly beginning. What looked like a background moment was actually the start of something enormous. Number 15. The film was made in just over a month. Hollywood today produces massive blockbuster films that take years to complete. Years of planning, shooting, editing, adding visual effects. But Tarantula was made with breathtaking speed. The entire production, from the first day of filming to the finished product, was completed in an astonishingly short amount of time. The shoot itself lasted approximately 4 weeks. Think about that. 4 weeks to tell a complete story, create a believable giant monster, shoot scenes in a real desert, and deliver something scary enough to fill movie theaters across the country. This kind of speed was not unusual for Universal science fiction films of that era. The studio ran an efficient, fast-moving production system. Scripts were prepared quickly. Crews were experienced and knew their jobs. Directors like Jack Arnold were professionals who could make decisions on their feet without long debates. Every day on set had a clear schedule, and everyone stuck to it. But speed always comes with pressure. Mistakes had to be fixed quickly. If a shot did not work, there was no luxury of waiting days to think about it. A solution had to be found today. Right now. This pressure actually pushed the creative team to find clever, simple answers to problems instead of complicated, expensive ones. The spider shots were a perfect example. Rather than spending weeks building a mechanical creature, they used a real spider and a miniature set. A solution that could be set up and filmed in a fraction of the time. Sometimes limitation creates genius, and sometimes a deadline is the greatest creative force of all. What looked polished and carefully planned was actually made at remarkable speed under enormous pressure. Number 14. The film spoke to Cold War fears. Tarantula came out in 1955, and that year was right in the middle of one of the most anxious periods in American history. The Cold War was at full intensity. People were genuinely afraid of nuclear weapons. They were afraid of what science might create that could not be controlled. Schools were running drills to teach children what to do if a bomb fell. The newspapers were full of stories about radiation, missiles, and the dangers of technology growing faster than human wisdom. Tarantula fit right into that anxious national mood. The story of a scientist who creates something powerful that escapes his control was not just a monster movie. It was a mirror held up to society. It said, "Look at what we are doing. Look at how fast we are moving. What if we go too far?" The giant spider was not really about a spider. It was about atomic anxiety. It was about the fear of science without conscience, the fear that the things we build to help us might end up hurting us. Audiences in 1955 felt this deeply, even if they were just watching for the thrills. They laughed and screamed and held their popcorn tightly. But somewhere underneath all of that, the film was doing something more serious. It was giving shape to a fear that had no clear shape in real life. Nuclear anxiety was invisible and abstract. A giant spider destroying a town? That you could see, that you could understand, that you could be afraid of in a clear, direct way. The movie gave people permission to feel a fear they had been carrying quietly. And that is why it resonated so deeply. It was not just entertainment, it was emotional release dressed up as a monster movie. Number 13. The nutrient formula subplot was deeply thought out. One of the things that separates Tarantula from many other creature features of its era is the care given to the internal logic of its story. The giant spider does not appear out of nowhere. It grows because of a specific scientific experiment gone wrong, and the filmmakers actually put real thought into how that experiment worked and what it meant. The scientist in the film, Professor Deemer, has developed a nutrient formula that dramatically accelerates growth in living organisms. He is testing it on animals, including the tarantula. When an accident in his lab causes the spider to escape, it has already been exposed to the formula, and the desert, full of livestock and wildlife, gives it plenty of food to keep growing. The screenwriters made sure that the growth happened at a rate that felt internally consistent. The spider did not become enormous overnight without explanation. There was a logic to its growth that the characters discussed and analyzed on screen. This grounded the story in something that felt almost believable. It also gave the human characters something real to do. They were not just running from a monster. They were trying to understand it. They were scientists and doctors trying to piece together what had happened and how to stop it. That detective element gave the film momentum and intelligence. It made the audience feel like they were solving a puzzle alongside the characters, not just watching things blow up. The script respected its audience enough to explain its own rules, and when the rules were clear, the fear that came from breaking them felt even more powerful. The monster was scary, but the idea behind the monster was scarier. Number 12. The special effects team used optical printing masterfully. Long before computers could place digital creatures into live-action footage, filmmakers had to use a technique called optical printing to combine different pieces of film together. Tarantula is considered one of the finest examples of optical printing from the 1950s, and the effects team deserves enormous credit for what they achieved. The process worked like this. First, the crew would film the real tarantula crawling across the miniature landscape. Then they would film the human actors in the real desert. Then, using an optical printer, a machine that could project both pieces of film through a camera at the same time, they would combine the two shots into a single image. Done well, the result looked seamless. The spider appeared to be in the same world as the people. Done poorly, it would look obviously fake. The team on Tarantula did it very well. The lighting on the spider matched the lighting of the outdoor scenes. The scale felt consistent. The movement of the spider had weight and presence that made it feel physically real. The effects team experimented with different sizes of the tarantula in frame depending on how far away it was supposed to be. When the spider was far off in the distance, it appeared smaller. As it got closer, it filled more and more of the frame. That gradual change created a growing sense of dread that built beautifully across the final act of the film. Every time you saw a little more of the spider, your heart sank a little further. The effects were not perfect. If you look closely today, you can see the seams. But for 1955, they were remarkable. Old tools. Masterful hands. Number 11. The film's score added hidden terror. Every great monster movie needs music that makes your skin crawl without you even realizing it. Tarantula had exactly that. The film's musical score was composed by Henry Mancini, working as part of Universal's music department at the time. Yes, that Henry Mancini. The same composer who would later write the famous Pink Panther theme and the iconic Moon River from Breakfast at Tiffany's. In 1955, he was still building his career, working on studio productions like Tarantula as part of his development as a composer. And what he created for this film is subtle and effective in ways that many viewers never consciously notice. The music for Tarantula avoided the loud, crashing orchestral explosions that many films of the era used to signal danger. Instead, Mancini used lower, slower, creeping sounds, music that felt like something moving through tall grass, something heavy, something patient. The score communicated the spider's nature. It was not in a hurry. It did not need to rush. It was enormous and unstoppable, and the music reflected that calm, inevitable quality. When the spider appeared on screen, the music did not scream. It breathed, and somehow that was more frightening than any loud brass fanfare could have been. The musical choices also helped smooth over moments where the visual effects could not quite carry the weight alone. When an effects shot was slightly less convincing, the music kept the emotional tone steady. It held the audience in the right state of mind. A quiet kind of fear. A slowly tightening grip. Music that did not show off. Music that served the story. And that quiet service made all the difference. Number 10. The disfigurement makeup was groundbreaking. One of the most disturbing elements of Tarantula is not the spider itself. It is what happens to the human characters who are exposed to the nutrient formula. The film shows scientists who have accidentally injected themselves with the formula and suffered horrifying physical changes. Their faces become distorted. Their features swell and shift into something unrecognizable. These scenes are genuinely unsettling even by today's standards, and in 1955, they were shocking. The makeup team responsible for these effects worked without the benefit of modern prosthetics and silicone appliances. They had to create the illusion of extreme physical transformation using far more basic materials. Foam rubber, paint, and careful sculpting techniques were used to build pieces that could be applied to the actors' faces. The goal was to suggest that the human body was being pushed beyond its limits. That biology was being forced to do something it was never meant to do. The result was something that disturbed audiences on a much deeper level than the spider itself, because the spider was outside. It was a creature from nature, grown too large. But the disfigured humans were something internal, something happening to a person from within. That kind of horror is far more personal. It touches something primal, the fear of your own body betraying you, the fear of losing your face, your identity, your recognizable self. The makeup team understood this intuitively and leaned into it. They did not make the transformations cartoonish or exaggerated. They kept them just real enough to be believable and just wrong enough to be deeply unsettling. That balance was everything, not just acting, something that felt horribly, quietly real. Number 9. The film helped define the creature feature genre before Tarantula. Monster movies existed, but they were not yet a clearly defined genre with its own set of rules and conventions. After Tarantula and the handful of films Jack Arnold made around the same time, they were. Tarantula helped establish a formula that dozens of films would follow for years. A scientist creates or disturbs something. That something grows beyond control. A small community is threatened. The military or government arrives too late to prevent damage. A hero, usually a scientist or doctor, figures out the weakness and saves the day. This structure was not invented by Tarantula alone, but the film executed it so cleanly and effectively that it became a template. Studios could look at Tarantula and say, "That is how you do it." The film balanced science and spectacle. It gave audiences both genuine ideas to think about and genuine scares to feel. It did not talk down to viewers, but it also never became so complicated that ordinary people could not follow it. That balance, intellectual enough to feel meaningful, exciting enough to feel fun, was the sweet spot that defined the best creature features of the era. Writers and directors who came after looked at films like Tarantula and used them as blueprints. Some of those films were great, some were terrible. But all of them owed something to the groundwork that Arnold and his team laid down in this dusty, spider-filled corner of the Arizona desert. A small film with a real spider and a tight budget quietly shaped the future of an entire genre. One small film changed the direction of many others. Number 8. The town sequences were filmed on Universal's backlot. While the desert scenes in Tarantula used real outdoor locations to create that feeling of vast emptiness and isolation, the town sequences were filmed on the Universal Studios backlot in Hollywood. Universal had a permanent outdoor set designed to look like a small American town, a main street with storefronts, houses. and sidewalks that could be dressed and redressed to look like any number of different communities, depending on the story. For Tarantula, the art department worked carefully to make the backlot feel like a genuine small desert community. Signs were created for local businesses. The buildings were given touches that suggested a working living place rather than an empty studio set. The crew used lighting techniques to match the bright, harsh quality of real desert sunlight so that when scenes cut between the backlot and the real outdoor locations, the visual change was not jarring. This kind of seamless transition between studio and location shooting required enormous skill from the cinematographer and lighting team. Every time the camera moved from one environment to the other, the audience needed to believe they were looking at the same world. The backlot also gave the production a controlled environment for the more complex scenes involving multiple actors, props, and precise camera movements. In the real desert, wind and dust and unpredictable light could ruin a carefully planned shot. On the backlot, conditions could be managed. The best of both worlds, real landscape for feeling, controlled studio for precision. What looked like one seamless world was actually two completely different places brought together with great care and skill. Number 7. Mara Corday was a strong screen presence for her time in the 1950s. Women in monster movies were often given very simple roles. They were there to scream, to be rescued, to look frightened and beautiful while the men did all the important work. Tarantula tried, within the limits of its era, to do something a little different with its female lead, played by actress Mara Corday. Corday played Stephanie Clayton, a graduate student who comes to work with Professor Deemer in the desert. She is intelligent. She asks good questions. She contributes to the investigation of what has gone wrong. She is not simply decorating the screen while the male characters solve the problem. For 1955, this was notable. She was not portrayed as helpless or hysterical. She held her composure in crisis moments. She engaged with the scientific details of the story. She had conversations with the male lead that were about ideas, not just emotion. Mara Corday herself was a skilled actress who brought genuine presence to the role. She had natural charisma and the ability to feel completely real even in the middle of fantastical situations. Her performance helped ground the film emotionally. When she was afraid, you believed it. When she was calm and thinking clearly, you trusted her. She made the human stakes of the story feel personal and specific. Corday would go on to appear in several other science fiction and adventure films during this period, becoming a recognizable face in the genre. But Tarantula remains one of her most celebrated performances. She was more than a screaming face in a monster movie. She brought humanity to a story that could easily have forgotten to include any. Number 6. The film was a box office success that surprised everyone. When Tarantula was released in December of 1955, nobody at Universal was quite sure how audiences would respond. The studio had produced it quickly and on a tight budget. It was not a prestige production. It was not expected to win awards or be discussed seriously by critics. It was designed to entertain people on a Friday night and make a reasonable amount of money. What happened next surprised almost everyone. The film was a genuine box office success. Audiences packed theaters across the country. The word of mouth was excellent. People who saw it told their friends. Their friends went and told more friends. The spider became a cultural talking point. People were genuinely frightened in a way that felt fun. That special kind of fear you only feel when you are completely safe in a movie theater seat and yet completely convinced by what you see on screen. The success of Tarantula confirmed for Universal that their science fiction creature formula was working. It gave the studio confidence to keep producing similar films. It encouraged directors like Jack Arnold to keep exploring the genre with seriousness and craft. It told audiences that they were hungry for this kind of story, not just the monster, but the ideas underneath the monster. The film earned far more than it cost to make, which in Hollywood is the clearest possible signal of success. A low-budget film made quickly and cleverly became one of the most profitable and beloved science fiction films of its decade. Nobody expected it. The spider arrived quietly. And then it was everywhere. Number 5. The fire sequence was one of the most dangerous shoots. Near the end of Tarantula, military jets are called in to stop the giant spider. They fire rockets and napalm at the creature, creating a massive explosion and wall of fire. This sequence is one of the most visually spectacular moments in the film, and creating it was genuinely dangerous. The production used real fire for several of these shots. Controlled burns were set up in the desert to create the walls of flame that would be filmed from a safe distance. Special effects technicians supervise the burns carefully, but fire is never fully predictable. Wind can change direction. Flames can spread faster than expected. Heat can affect camera equipment and crew members even at distances that seem safe. The crew worked methodically and with great caution. Safety personnel were on standby at all times. The shots had to be filmed quickly because a burn cannot be paused and restarted. Once the fire is lit, you film what you get. The camera operators had to be in position, focused, and ready to capture the moment perfectly on the first try. There was no second chance with real fire. What you see in those final frames of the film, those dramatic walls of orange and red flame cutting across the desert landscape, was captured under real pressure, with real heat, on a real afternoon in the California desert. The actors who appear in those sequences had to perform their reactions convincingly while genuinely feeling the heat coming off the fires in the distance. That was not acting heat. That was actual heat, and it showed in their faces. What looked controlled was always one wind shift away from chaos. Number 4. The film used real military cooperation. One of the most impressive visual elements in Tarantula is the appearance of actual military aircraft during the film's climax. Real jet fighters appear on screen, flying low and firing what looks like actual munitions at the giant spider. These were not model planes. They were not painted illustrations. They were real aircraft. And the reason they appeared in the film was because the production secured genuine cooperation from the United States military. In the 1950s, the American military was quite willing to work with Hollywood productions that presented the armed forces in a positive, heroic light. Tarantula showed the military arriving decisively to protect American civilians from a terrifying threat. That was exactly the kind of image the military was happy to support. In exchange for allowing the production to film real aircraft in operation, the military received positive publicity and a film that portrayed their forces as capable and heroic. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement. The filmmakers got spectacular footage they could never have afforded to create any other way. The military got a favorable portrayal in a widely seen popular film. The cooperation also extended to the authenticity of the equipment shown. The weapons and aircraft in the film were genuine and current for the period. This gave the climax a sense of real-world credibility that elevated the entire sequence. Audiences in 1955 would have recognized those jets. They would have known those aircraft were real. And that recognition made the threat feel real and the response feel meaningful. Real aircraft, real cooperation, real impact on screen. Number 3. The film's legacy inspired generations of filmmakers decades after Tarantula was first released. Its influence can be felt in some of the most celebrated films in cinema history. Steven Spielberg has spoken about growing up watching creature features of the 1950s and how they shaped his imagination and approach to filmmaking. The way Tarantula and similar films used suggestion and slow reveals to build tension, showing a little, hiding a lot, is a technique that Spielberg used brilliantly in Jaws in 1975. The idea that what you do not see is scarier than what you do see runs in a direct line from Jack Arnold's work in the 1950s to the shark that stays mostly hidden beneath the water in Jaws. Filmmakers who grew up with Tarantula internalized its lessons without always consciously knowing it. They learned that a monster needs a moral dimension to be truly frightening. They learned that human characters need to feel real and specific, not just functional. They learned that science could be a source of horror just as easily as it could be a source of hope. They learned that small towns and ordinary landscapes could be made terrifying precisely because they were familiar. These lessons echoed forward through decades of filmmaking. Every time a modern director builds tension by showing only a shadow or a sound before revealing the monster, there is a line back to Jack Arnold standing in an Arizona desert, waiting for a real tarantula to take a few more steps. The spider is gone, but its footprints are everywhere. Old lessons, new monsters, the same timeless fear. Number 2. The ending was almost completely different. Here is something that very few fans of Tarantula know. The ending of the film, the dramatic military airstrike that destroys the giant spider, was not the original planned conclusion. Early in the writing process, the filmmakers considered a very different resolution. In earlier drafts of the screenplay, the plan was to have the scientists find a chemical weakness in the spider, something related to the nutrient formula that had caused its growth. The idea was that the same science that created the monster could be used to undo it. The spider would be reduced back to normal size or killed by a scientific counteragent, and the story would end with a clear moral message about science correcting its own mistakes. This ending would have been more thematically consistent with the film's core ideas. It would have completed the circle. Science causes the problem, science solves the problem. But as the script developed and the production took shape, the decision was made to go with the more visually spectacular military ending. The jets, the fire, the napalm. It was more exciting. It was more cinematically powerful. And in the climate of 1955, showing the American military as the ultimate force capable of defeating any threat was also culturally resonant. The change worked. The ending the film has is thrilling and satisfying in a visceral way. But the abandoned ending was more poetic. It was a road not taken, a quieter, more thoughtful conclusion that might have made Tarantula a different kind of classic. Both endings would have worked. Only one was ever seen. The other exists only in old documents and imagination. Number 1. The film holds a mirror to human ambition. Everything in Tarantula points to one central truth, and it is the fact that earns the top spot on this list because it is not about production techniques or casting choices or behind-the-scenes accidents. It is about what the film actually means. At its heart, Tarantula is a story about human ambition and its consequences. Professor Deemer is not a villain. He is not evil. He is a good man with a good dream. He wants to solve world hunger. He wants to use science to help people who are suffering. His intentions are as pure as intentions can be. And yet his creation escapes. It grows. It destroys. It kills. Not because he wanted those things to happen, but because he moved too fast, because he did not fully understand what he was working with, because the power he was trying to harness was greater than he had accounted for. That is the real story of Tarantula. It is a story that was relevant in 1955 and is relevant today. Every time a new technology arrives in the world and brings unexpected consequences, Tarantula becomes relevant again. Every time a scientific breakthrough moves faster than society's ability to manage it, the giant spider is there, a symbol of good intentions producing uncontrollable results. The film does not say science is bad. It does not say ambition is wrong. It says that power without wisdom is dangerous, that speed without caution is reckless, that even the most noble human goals can go terribly wrong if we forget to respect the complexity of the natural world we are working within. A monster made of flesh and web and the best of human intentions. That is Tarantula, and that is why it still matters. Bonus fact, the shot nobody talks about. There is one moment in Tarantula that almost no one discusses in the reviews, the interviews, or the fan discussions. It happens near the middle of the film, and it lasts only a few seconds. But it is one of the most carefully constructed shots in the entire production, and understanding how it was made reveals something extraordinary about the creativity of the filmmakers. The shot shows the giant spider reflected in the surface of a small water trough used by livestock on a ranch. The spider is not seen directly in this moment, only its reflection, shimmering and warped in the water, moving slowly, growing larger as it approaches. The reflection appears before the spider itself fills the frame, giving the audience a few seconds of terrible awareness before the full horror arrives. This shot was not in the original script. It was invented on the day of filming. The crew had arrived at the ranch location and were setting up for a different scene when the cinematographer noticed the water trough. He mentioned to Jack Arnold that a reflection might be an interesting way to introduce the spider in this sequence, more unsettling than a direct approach. Arnold agreed immediately. The camera was repositioned. The optical printing plan for the scene was quickly adjusted, and the shot was captured. It required careful coordination between the live-action filming team and the optical effects team, who would later combine the tarantula footage with the water reflection. It took extra time that was not in the schedule. But Arnold felt it was worth it. The resulting image became one of the most quietly haunting moments in the film. Not the spider crashing through a building, not the fire at the end, just a still reflection in a water trough, growing darker and larger as something enormous approaches. That shot was not planned. It was discovered. In the space between a water trough and a ready camera, a moment of quiet genius was found. Old tools, pure instinct. And one unplanned shot became the most poetic image in the whole film. Tarantula is more than a monster movie from the 1950s. It is a story about the world humans are always trying to build and the unintended things that crawl out of it. It is about a scientist who loved humanity so much that he tried to feed the whole world and lost control of something that could destroy a town. It is about a desert that swallowed ambition and gave back fear. It is about a real spider walking across a tiny fake world and somehow making audiences believe in something enormous. What makes Tarantula last is not the special effects, though they were clever. It is not the creature, though it was frightening. It is the feeling underneath all of it, that human beings are always reaching for something just beyond their grasp, and sometimes what reaches back is not what they expected. Every movie hides a truth. Tarantula hides several. About science and responsibility, about ambition and its shadow, about the small creative choices that make a film live forever in the minds of people who see it. We hope these 20 facts brought that truth a little closer. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we will keep uncovering them, one story at a time.